Hello everybody and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. If you're a returning listener or if you're a new listener, welcome. The Magical Learning Podcast is a podcast that breaks down difficult topics in everyday life and in business and breaks them down in a fun and lighthearted way. Today we have an amazing conversation. This is a really good one for people that are in meetings a lot. It's called Mastering Your Meetings. We're talking to Paul McGregor, who was just an absolute riot to chat to. I think we had one of the most laughs per episode here, but if you're someone that struggles with meetings or sometimes feels like you're a hostage in them, this is a really good episode to help you break down those meetings, hopefully make them more interesting, or if you don't need to be there, a way to be out of it. Enjoy this one. I know I had a lot of fun, and as always, everybody, have a magical week. Hello everybody and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. I'm sure that you've seen we've got a guest and we'll get to them shortly. But first let's check in with the regular team and see what's up. So Danette, you were first on today. How is your week going?
Yeah, my week's been really good, Jez. I've been doing a lot of content creation this week, so recorded a couple of podcasts, done some video book reviews, written a bit for a newsletter. So yeah, it's been a busy week, and travel to Canberra as well. So I'm back at home now, and it is quite cold. Hence my jumper today.
And if people want to check out the full jumper suite going on, I would suggest they go over to Spotify or YouTube to check out the video component of this podcast. Let's jump over to Graham. Graham, how are you going this week?
Hey, Jez, I'm good. Thank you for asking. And thanks for not making me feel awkward about not being first on today, again, still. Realised this week that, I actually realised about 25 and a half minutes ago, my hoodie is now less clean on the inside than it is on the outside. To the hoodie company, wherever you are, can you fix that please so I don't actually have to wash it or soak it or anything? Please? Thank you.
Yes, look, I think we can say that this may be coming across as a criticism, but we are all massive supporters of hoodie here. We've all worn heaps of them. Yeah, so yes, this is just another feature that we'd recommend. And also, we've just off the podcast talked about, is it pronounced Oodie or Oodie? And I did shoot an ad for them and they did say Oodie, so I'm just going to stick with that. But I just wanted to clarify that for people.
Nice.
Yes, we should put a link, if you can find it, to your ad so you can show people in the ad. That would be fun.
I don't know if that link still exists, but we can see. And Paul, how are you going this week? Any hoodie troubles?
I'm feeling very embarrassed that I don't even own an hoodie. And I did not get the memo that we'll be talking about our jumpers at the start, so I don't really know what to say now. I'm in a suit. How boring.
Look, I think if people are watching, they'll say it's actually quite a fun suit. So, Paul, don't put yourself down. There's a fun combination going on there. And for those that are just listening, we are talking to Paul McGregor. Not only, this is not your first podcast with Danette. We've done an Adapt podcast that'll be coming out soon. But this will be their first time our listeners in the sort of magical learning multiverse will be hearing you. So, Paul, for people that are just being introduced to you for the first time, do you want to give us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's interesting. I studied law, Jez, way back in the day, and I've never practiced law. So I've done all sorts of other things. I've worked in government, I've managed adult education centres, and most recently I was a partner in a little consulting. For a long time I thought that was a big weakness because I kept changing jobs, I kept doing all these new things, and then eventually I realised that that was my strength. I love learning new stuff and I get bored quite quickly. And so in all those different experiences as well, part of the value of that was I saw lots of different ways that people were working together and lots of different ways that was not working. So that's kind of led me into the work I do now, which is I work with leaders and teams and I help them to enjoy their work that they're doing together. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm based in Nelson at the top of the South Island of New Zealand. We are the sunshine capital of Aotearoa. So that's home for me now.
Well, I'd say sunshine by nature, but also by your personality as well, Paul. I mean, your positive energy is shining through the camera, so I'm loving that. I think, given your experience, this topic of mastering your meetings is perfect because you've obviously bounced around with a couple of different types of industries and stuff like that, so you'll have a great insight. But before we jump into the official sort of questions here, do you want to tell us a little bit about why you chose this topic?
Because meetings suck for so many people, and they suck up so much of our time as well. So when they're not done well, that just has this huge flow-on effect to everything else that we're trying to achieve. And for a lot of people, they're the worst part of their job when they should be the best part of their job. I was talking to someone working in the health sector recently, and she had, it was a coaching session, and so we were looking at her diary for the week, and she had no spare time in her week because there were 30 hours of meetings in the week. And most of those were one-on-ones with people in her team, but a lot of them were the sort of meetings where you get called in just in case, oh, we might need your input on this, maybe. And of course, that just means she's doing the rest of her job in her evenings and the weekend, and she is on the cusp of burning out. So meetings matter, and for many of us, they are not fun, they're not enjoyable, they're not productive. So yeah, I'd love to turn that around for people.
Well, I think that sounds absolutely perfect, Paul. I can't wait to dive in. So I think let's just start with Danette's question. So Danette, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your questions are and why you picked them?
So, Paul, I always ask more than one because I love to learn. And so my first one is, why do we have meetings?
What made you want to ask that question, Danette?
Because I think that people don't necessarily think intentionally around meetings. And so actually thinking about, what is the purpose behind having meetings, and are there better ways of doing this?
Nice. Yeah, I think you're so right. We kind of, I think they're just an automatic reaction sometimes. Oh, there's a problem, well, we'll shove it in a meeting. You know, my first role out of university was in the Ministry of Justice, and so we'd have team meetings, we'd have project meetings, we'd have unit meetings, we'd have meetings for where you were in the hierarchy in the organisation, and it was just any kind of issue, a meeting was the solution. And sometimes that's helpful, but also then they can get stuck in our diary and we can forget why we might have put them in there in the first place. So I love that this is your first question, because this is the first question that I always ask people. And I would phrase it as something like, what is the legacy you want this meeting to leave behind? And so that makes us think about the future and what difference is it going to make? And that's a really helpful way of framing it and starting out with why we want to host this meeting in the first place. Yeah.
Love that answer. And so then my second one is, what are some simple things you can do to make meetings better? There's
lots of things. The first thing I'd say, I learned this concept of priming from Priya Parker, who wrote this lovely book called The Art of Gathering. And in it, she collates all these different stories of meetings, gatherings from ordinary life, like funerals, weddings, 21sts, but also, work things or your 50th birthday party. And she talks about what you do beforehand really sets the scene for how people show up and what they're expecting. So, just like if you were painting a house and you slap on the normal coat of paint, I don't even know what you call it, the non-primer, the proper paint first, it'll just fall off, like it won't stick. So you've got to put the priming paint on first. So that's what we have to do ahead of time is, give something that is going to make people go, oh yeah, I want to come to this and I know what to expect. I'll give an example of that. A while back I received, on the same day, so it was really stark, I received an invite to a friend's wedding. And it was beautiful. It was, handwritten, this nice thick stock paper, and you sort of picked it up, and then there was a website to go and check it out and let you know the program, and this is what to do with gifts, and there were these beautiful photos. That was exciting, right? And so my wife and I sort of sat there and we had this experience for 10, 15 minutes where we were talking about the wedding and getting into it. And then I was back at work and I got this invite to a 4-hour-long meeting from a client called the RAG meeting, the RAG meeting. And there was nothing in the description. And it was just so stark, the difference that made to what I was thinking about and feeling about before turning up in the meeting. So that would be my number one tip to start with, is think about how you can prime people before they even get in the room.
I love that. And I love that 2 examples, because we can imagine getting that beautiful invite in the mail and, the tactile experience versus a meeting with a name that you don't actually really understand. Yeah.
And
that's
it doesn't
awesome.
mean we have to do something amazing and beautiful for every meeting, but you can kind of bring that same spirit of thoughtfulness to any meeting that you're hosting.
Love that. Awesome. Thank you, Paul. I'll hand it over back to Jez.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I love that. And I'm still left with questions about what a RAG meeting is and why it takes 4 hours. I have to be honest. It does ask more questions than it answers, I think. But let's jump over to Graham. Graham, I think your question is a great one coming out of this one. So what was your question and why'd you pick it?
So many potential uses for RAG as an acronym, which has got nothing whatsoever to do with my question, but like run away gratefully could be one if it's a 4-hour meeting. That's where I'm heading.
Nice.
A really awful gathering. I'll stop. So, having been involved one way or the other. Oh, by the way, Paul, should ask now. We actually have a meeting scheduled for Monday, and I'd really like you to come along and fix it for us. Am I kidding? Oh, hang on. Sorry, the others are on the call. That's embarrassing. Acknowledging that a lot of meetings get called just because it's either we just schedule it for the same time, the same day every week, or I love the language you use. There's a problem, let's shove it in a meeting because that's what it deserves for being a problem. It should have been a solution. But then we'd probably shove that in the meeting anyway. What are some tips or some tactics that you found really helpful for helping I was going to say leaders, but it's not always just leaders who schedule meetings. But for the people who do schedule the meetings, are there a couple of tactics that you found really effective in helping them to actually stop and think a lot more, be a lot more deliberate about why we're calling the meeting? And I'd love this idea of legacy. What is the legacy we want to leave behind from this experience, this gathering? Just a long-winded, bloody rambling question yet again. What works in helping people
what works to be more
be
deliberate
better at scheduling
about
meetings? We could have had a meeting just about my inability to ask a proper question.
We could have. Yeah. We'll schedule that for next week. One of the things that I created for my clients was the facilitation canvas, which is like a 1-page tool to ask you some key questions to think through why you're running this thing and how you might do it. And that looks at purpose, it looks at people who are coming along, it looks at the place that you're going to host it, and it looks at the protocols by how you're going to invite people to behave. So, those are 4 really useful things to think through. I also love a friend of mine called Leanne Hughes. She wrote a book called The 2-Hour Workshop Blueprint. And one of the things she goes on about is the name that you give it and being a little bit more thoughtful and creative about the name, which I really like. So at my old consulting firm, we had these monthly team meetings. They were just called the monthly team review sessions, I think, to begin with. I don't know, kind of boring. And then one of the directors read a book by Brene Brown, which talked about the idea of a rumble. And a rumble is, you could call it a brave conversation. It's where you talk about the things that you don't really want to talk about. So we started calling our monthly team review sessions the monthly rumbles. And every time we said it, it almost had that kind of energy of like, we're going to have a rumble. And it brought a little bit of lightheartedness to what were often quite serious conversations about things that hadn't gone so well in the month. So what you call a meeting can, again, just change people's perspective and make them think differently about why they're coming together.
Nice. Love it. Thank you.
So, Graham, you're meeting on Monday. What could you call it?
Oh, don't get me started. So many things. I'll come back to that. I will provide an answer a little bit later. Oh,
No,
I'm just, yeah, I don't know, something, a, a multicellular mix up. That's not
Ooh,
working. Let me
that's
get back to
great.
you on that.
No, let's go with it, Graham. I've put you on the spot, and I think you've done well.
Thanks, Paul.
Absolutely. I think this has really inspired me. I feel like we should, if we ever do anything with sort of any royalty, a royal rumble with them beforehand could be kind of interesting, you know? Bring them in one at a time into the Zoom meeting, and then whoever survives gets to stay in, and the other people have to be evicted. Lots of good options there. Well, I'm going to jump into my question now, actually, Paul. And this is something that I hear a lot about meetings, and personally have experienced in different jobs, which is that I've been in a lot of meetings that could have been emails. What are some signs that the meeting you are heading into maybe should be just turned into an email?
I think we just know, right? The other thing to acknowledge is we all have good intentions about bringing people together. So sometimes it's about mitigating risk. You go, oh, I need to make sure other people know stuff because we want to break down silos. So there's always this good intention. But for me, the question is, what's the flow of information? Is it just going to be going from one side to the other, or is there going to be flows backwards and forwards? So that for me is the signal that it should have just been an email, as if it's just information sharing. The other thing I had in, Al Pittenpali wrote this book called Read This Before Your Next Meeting. And he suggests in that there's only two types of meetings. And one of them is the really creative, fun, interesting, brainstormy meetings where you got beanbags and creative stuff and you sit around having a great time. But actually you're really tapping into your emotions and your creative side. And then the other side of other type of meeting is the decision-making meeting. More logical, you need your agenda ahead of time, you need to sort of understand how you're making the decision, what the trade-offs are, all that kind of stuff. And I like that. It's not a true way of splitting up meetings. There are other type of meetings, but that kind of just sends you down to very distinct tracks. And so if you can't answer that question of what kind of meeting are we actually having, then again, maybe it just should be an email.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I love splitting that into those kind of two different topics because that does actually create two different baskets. And I guess if it's not in either of those, then what are we doing is a great question.
And we've got such great tools now, you know, Loom with recording videos, other tools like that make it so easy to share your thoughts in different and engaging ways. And I sometimes wonder if we could almost take what we do with social media and apply that to our internal communications as well. So rather than a 2-hour-long update meeting, what if spread across the week there were 5 posts on your on your intranet that in 30 seconds per post you shared something? And there were just those little bite-sized bits. It works on social media. Can't we make that work internally as well?
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of hack that system. I like that a lot. Thanks for that, Paul. I might jump on to Alan's question here. So Alan's question is, he's looked at your website and he said, this piece on Paul's website has really got me intrigued. And this is the quote. As leaders, we've been taught to have answers, to dictate strategy, to control the room when we meet. That's not viable anymore. Today's changing world demands that we lead with questions. And then that's the end of the quote. And then this was Alan's question off that. I would love to know more around this thinking of asking questions and not dictating.
A friend of mine, we caught up recently and we're just chatting about a few things, and he reminded me of this. It was an away day that I attended probably about 8 years ago. I was invited to run a workshop in the afternoon on youth engagement because the away day was all about launching the organisation's new strategy and it was focused on young people. So I said, oh, can I come along for the morning? I just want to observe, see how you run things. And they said, yeah, sure. So I sat in on the morning and they had an external facilitator who was running it. And the morning was about the strategy launch. So she kind of did some warming up and introductions and all of that sort of thing. And then passed it over to the CEO and said, all right, over to you to, launch the new strategy. And so the CEO stands up and talks for about 10, 15 minutes, and it was all good. It was all coherent and kind of made sense. And then at the end of it, he goes, are there any questions? And about 2 seconds later, one of the general managers stands up and goes, oh, I don't have a question, but I do want to add, And then he was off for 5 or 6 minutes, adding his 2 cents into it. And then, because he'd spoken, when he finished, then the other 2 general managers had to say something as well, because they didn't want to be one-upped. And so, sort of that was the time gone. And then at the end of it, the CEO turns back to the facilitator and says, right, back to you. And I was just sitting there going, oh, there must be another bit where they're going to talk with their staff and staff will ask questions, and there just wasn't. And I sort of went away from that and I went, was I the only one who found that really inadequate and dissatisfactory? And so I asked people over lunch, and they were saying things like, well, I didn't really understand what that bit was about in the strategy, and I wanted to ask a question, but I didn't feel like I could. And so for me, it was just an example where the leaders have turned up with the answer because they have been conditioned to think that that's what it means to be a leader. That's how you add value, is by having clarity, having vision, knowing the pathway. And that stuff is valuable, but it's not the only thing that we need leaders to do. We also need leaders to show up with curiosity, to ask questions, to create space for other people to have their input as well. So for me, that's the difference between leading with answers and leading with questions. Leading with answers, people can get dependent on you as the leader, whereas leading with questions, it actually allows your amazing people who you've got on your team to give the best of themselves.
What a good example. I feel like, Paul, you've brought such good visceral examples that are making these things so easy to understand, whether it's the invitation and even the weight of the paper in that example and this meeting. I feel like I'm really getting a great visualization of what this kind of looks like when it's good and when it's bad. So loving that. Let's talk about something a little bit new. This is John's question here. And he says, with virtual meeting the norm now, how can we get people to engage rather than having their camera off and sleeping, or multitasking and not doing it well?
I love this question. One thing I would say, though, is you never know what someone's experience is like on the other end. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at Graham right now, and he's kind of looking up at the sky. He doesn't look that interested. Whereas Danette's got a great big smile on her face and she's laughing, and Danette's clearly having a great time. Graham has actually got his phone out now. He's away. He's off. So, and our brain defaults to a negative assumption. So we might be in a meeting and we're looking at the screen and, people have got their videos off and some of them look a bit bored and are scratching their chin, but maybe they've just got an itch on their chin. Maybe they're looking down because they're actually taking notes right now and they're really engaged. So you won't know what people are thinking and feeling unless you ask in this digital realm. And that doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like, it's just going, hey everyone, I just want to pause and see how we're getting on with the session today. So I'll pop a question in the chat. Is this meeting your needs right now? What else could we do? Or what's one thing you've learned so far today? Do you think we need to talk about anything else? Like, there's easy questions to ask that can give you the feedback that you might not otherwise be getting, and then you can adjust based on that.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it as well. When I first read John's question, I'm like, this is a funny way to pitch this question, but it's always good. Let's jump in.
I have one other thing actually around virtual meetings, because the camera on, camera off thing is an interesting one. There's a little trick that I learned from Gwyn Wainsborough, who's a facilitation expert, which is you do an activity at the start which forces people to turn their video on. So you might, one of my favorite ones is the paper on camera activity. So you ask everyone, get a piece of paper and hold it up to the camera. And then you ask a question, and if the question applies, then somebody removes the piece of paper. Oh, now I'm all blurry on camera. Hello, camera. So that means people have to turn their cameras on to take part in that activity. And once they've done that, right, you might go, take it away if you're part of the management team, or take it away if you're from Australia, or Take it away if you'd rather be doing something else right now, but your manager forced you to come to this meeting. And that kind of is lighthearted and an easy way to get engagement. And then suddenly everybody's cameras are on, and they just keep them on because, they go where the river takes them.
That is a really good approach. I love that. I think that's a great tactic. I think also I'm going to have to make that the social media breakout clip because I think it's just a very useful tip that people can use. So thank you for that one there, Paul. Speaking of slightly unorthodox approaches, I'm going to jump into Allegra's question here, which is, are there any unorthodox approaches to meetings that stand out to you? Did they work or did they not work?
Well, there's lots. I mean, the stand-up meeting was the first thing that popped into my head. And the research on those shows that if you do a stand-up meeting, in general, they take half the time and people are just as satisfied. So, okay, that works. The other unorthodox one that I'd throw into the mix would be open space technology. This is the idea that you can turn up to a meeting with no agenda and you create the agenda together when you're there based on what people want to talk about. So if you've ever heard of an unconference, that's what they do at an unconference. And there's 4 guidelines and 1 law that let you know how to run an open space. And there's something like, whoever turns up are the right people, whatever is talked about is the only thing that could have been talked about, whatever happened was the right thing to have happened, and when it ends, it's over, and that was the right time for it to end. Those are the 4 guidelines. So they're like very freeing. And then the law is the law of 2 feet, which says if you're not contributing and you're not gaining anything from the conversation you're part of, that's cool. Use your 2 feet and go somewhere else. Which again is just a really different way of doing meetings, because most of us, we can feel held hostage by meetings where they're forced on us and we sit there going, oh, this is pointless, why am I here, I'm not giving anything and I'm not learning, but we stay out of this sense of obligation. So open space just completely flips that on its head.
Paul, can I just jump in? Thanks for sharing those, and thanks also for now completely ruining Monday's meeting.
Oh yeah,
because
again? Yeah,
well, everyone who was attending, as far as I'm aware, has 2 feet, and now they have permission to use them. So great, thanks for that. Fortunately, I wasn't chairing it anymore. I wasn't sure whether you'd heard of the water meetings as an approach to having shorter meetings. One version is everybody drinks at least a litre of water before the meeting starts, and then it just comes down to bladder control. And the variation on that is an underwater meeting, but it's a lot shorter. For lots of reasons, because even if you're wearing... By the way, folks, I'm not recommending any of these. Please, if you're at home, don't try this at home. It's not a good idea. But even if you're wearing scuba gear, for most of us, we can't do the hand signal thing very well, so it just... And then you get sidetracked by fish and great white sharks and things. But I love the idea of law of 2 feet. Just to get rid of some of the hostages in meetings who don't want to be there and who can't contribute.
Imagine if every meeting was optional. Where does the onus now lie to make meetings good?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and Graham, I'm sad that you've let the world in on our secret of underwater meetings. They're going to tap into our client base of orcas and sharks anytime. It's a shame.
I can just see so many potential lawsuits from this. But what the hell, it's Friday.
Amazing. Well, let's jump into our last question here, Paul. That's unrelated to underwater meetings or even water meetings. This is, I think, one that is more, I think, targeted towards leaders maybe or something. But Kanika's asked, what is a sign that I might not be running meetings in a way that feels open and safe for a team?
Well, there's lots of signs, lots of different signs, because there's lots of ways that a meeting can be unsafe or not inclusive. One of the most helpful things I saw on this was Lynn Kazali, who's written a ton of books, one of them on facilitation. And, she asks, is it safe to do these different sorts of behaviours? And she lists about 15 to 20 different things, like, is it safe to share your emotions? Is it safe to disagree with the leader? Is it safe to share a new idea? Is it safe to question the way you currently do things? And so just all these different ways that meetings can be safe or unsafe. And it's quite sobering, actually, when you look at them, because it makes you realize that there's so many different needs that people have when you come together, and you're never going to meet all of them. You're never going to get it right. But all we can do is be open if we kind of get that signal that actually maybe we're running this in a way that doesn't allow people to put their best foot forward. So I find that as a really helpful filter to go, yeah, am I allowing these things to happen? And if I'm not, yeah, what else do I need to try that might be different?
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Paul. This has been such a great chat. I've taken down so many notes, but I want to grab some final thoughts from our team here. So I might start with Danette. Danette, any final thoughts on today's conversation and just sort of mastering your meetings?
I really loved that thing about just even thinking about the name of the meeting and the experience that people are going to get in that meeting. So I've taken 3 pages of notes from this session, found them really, really helpful. My tip for getting people to turn their camera on is as they come into the room, I go, oh, Paul, where are you coming in from? And people feel weird without their camera on. So that often works as well. But I love these ideas of how do we engage people, and, you know, and if they're not engaged, giving them that permission to get up and wander out of the room and find something that actually is better for them. So great session. Really loved it, Paul. Thank you.
Cheers, Danette.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Danette, and great questions today. Graham, any final thoughts on today's conversation and mastering your meetings?
So, and what a wonderful meeting this has been, Paul, and thank you for helping make that so. Danette's question, where are you coming in from, works really well until the answer is bed, which I have had happen in a meeting, but that was me. I just loved all of it. I liked Danette, lots of notes, some of the insights, fantastic. And thank you for sharing references to so many other people's work and books and etc. around facilitating and meetings. I also am excited about the idea of naming, partly because I love language. And so Monday, look out, that's all I can say.
Nice.
Thanks,
Is that
Paul.
the name of the...
Monday look out. I'm not sure. I'm still stuck on, like, here's another book idea, 101 names for a meeting. I'll get to that on the weekend, maybe.
Nice.
Did Monty Python ever write a book on how to master a meeting? They should have, back in the day. Paul, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Seriously, thank you.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Graham. Great questions today, great insights, and great jokes, as always. Let's go to Paul. Paul, any final thoughts on today's conversation and mastering your meetings?
Well, Graham, your comment about being caught doing a meeting in bed made me think of my little 3-year-old. The story is not going where you think it's going. It's very much safe for work. My boy is 3 years old, and he got asked at kindy the other week, "Oh, No. The teacher said, your mum's a teacher, isn't she?" And my boy goes, No. My mum's a dancer, and my dad works in bed. So there we go. You're not the only one, Graham.
Amazing. Well, we love that, Paul. Now, Paul, before we go, I'm sure a lot of people have been listening to this, loving the stories, loving your insights. Where's the best place for them to reach out to you, and any resources you'd recommend for them?
Come and hang out on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people there and sharing whatever's top of mind for me and the people that I work with. And my website is paulmcgregor.co.nz, and McGregor's spelt with an MC. There's a bunch of resources on there, like the facilitation canvas that I mentioned earlier.
All right, well, fantastic. And if you love this conversation, you can check out Paul on the Adapt with Danette FM podcast coming out soon. So if you love this, just wait a couple of weeks. That's going to be out. But to everybody that's been on the call, thank you so much. To everybody that is listening and sharing, thank you so much as well. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.